Hi everyone, this is Dr. Raquel Butler from Integrated Veterinary Therapeutics.
And Sophie Vandenberg from Equine Postulate. And we welcome you to the Equine Functional Posture Podcast, your ultimate source for insights into the influence of functional posture on biomechanics, health, and overall well-being of horses.
Whether you're a seasoned equestrian, an equine professional, or simply a horse enthusiast, this podcast is designed to help you understand the critical aspects of functional posture.
Tune in each week as we discuss practical tips, delve into expert interviews, and explore the latest research in the impact of functional posture on equine anatomy, physiology, movement, and more.
Let's create a world where we empower our horses to be in a mental, emotional, and physical balance. Hi everyone, welcome to today's podcast. We are talking about compensation today, which is an interesting topic that I think everyone's going to be quite interested in the discussion. So how are you going today, Soph?
Going really well. Yeah, this is a good topic because it comes up in so many conversations everywhere you go, even, with clients as well. People want to know things about their horse. So the concepts are very valuable for everyone.
Yeah, especially the question of how long do you think it's going to be until my horse gets better? I love
Exactly.
that one. And often my answer is like, I guess previously I used to take that as a personal question, like it was up to me how long that took and it was my responsibility. Now, as I've kind of grown and developed as a body worker and, my education has developed, I've recognized it's not up to me. And sometimes it's up to the horse, sometimes it's up to the owner, and I can have an input in that. But now my answer to that question is often, can you wait until at least the end of the session and then we'll see how the horses change within the session? And then my second part of the answer is, especially if it's the very first time I've seen a horse, I'm like, I want to see how this horse responds over a minimum of probably 3 sessions. And sometimes it can be a little bit longer than that before you really get down to, okay, like this horse is like definitely just going to continue to improve, or we do have a fair bit of compensation that has now shifted and we're seeing a different horse now. So that means that it's going to be a different progress for that horse from there. So yeah, it can be difficult as a body worker, like to give people the answers that they want because you don't always have the answer, especially in that first session. Um, and sometimes it unravels in a different way to what you expected. Like we do not have X-ray vision to go, oh, this horse has got like this, and this going on, and it's going to be like this, and we can control all the variables, and you know this is going to be the outcome. Unfortunately, it just doesn't always work that way.
Definitely. And I suppose it's just the ongoing collection of information, which is, another part of the puzzle, like compensation allows you to gather information that's changing as well. Over time, you're talking about up to, at least 3 sessions, while you're learning about the horse and getting to know and hearing feedback from the owner about what's happened in the time between. How would you describe compensation?
Yeah, I think there's different types of compensation, and so it can be a little bit difficult with that. Like, sometimes there's more transient, like they just got a rock in their foot and they're compensating from that. So they're walking, and I've been caught out with that. I'll just tell a little story, but I remember I was looking at this horse that my client was looking to buy, and I think it was the third time I'd seen her. And the other 2 times she'd been improving, but there was like a low grade lameness, I think it was their left hind. And so we knew that, right? And so third time I'm like, geez, it's got worse. Like, what the hell? And I hadn't actually picked up her feet yet. Like I was like, well, we know there's a left hind lameness. I was like, damn, it's got worse. I was a bit disappointed. And I thought, I'm just gonna pick up her feet and have a look. She had a nail in that foot, like that had happened that day. And it was a little reminder that don't always assume that it's the same thing that it was last time. So that was a
Yeah.
good reminder for that. And if something is getting worse, maybe there's another injury that's occurred, even though it might happen to be like, what's the chances, right? That's her
Yes.
lame foot. She steps on a nail. It ended up being completely fine. We cleaned it straight away and dealt with it. But like sometimes we have an expectation and we have to always re-examine the horse each time without the expectation that, oh well, I know she's got a left hind lameness. So that was a transient compensation on top of what you'd probably call a more established or chronic compensation of that was causing a lameness, which I think we isolated to a stifle from memory. Um, but yeah, once it's kind of established, so then if a horse has had, maybe they had a primary injury that created a movement of pattern, and maybe that primary injury is still a problem, like there's still a pathology there, or there's still pain there, restriction, whatever. And so then you've got that then can lead to a follow-on effect of other compensations in the body as they like maybe compensate to the diagonal forelimb, and then perhaps that gets a bit sore, and then they're kind of trying to compensate for that now. And then maybe they change the loading in their feet and the foot balance has changed, and now they're compensating for a foot balance change. And then all of a sudden, if that's been going on for a year, then you've started to get like this onion layers upon layers upon layers, as opposed to like you've got a pathology in, say, an elbow, and the tricep has created a stabilization around that. And it's actually kind of managed to stabilize that within the system. And, there'll still be a flow on effect to the rest of the system, but if it's managed to kind of stabilize that within the system of the leg, that can sometimes reduce the flow-on effects to the rest of the body. So,
Yeah.
there can be really different patterns in there.
Definitely. So, yeah, like you were saying, you've almost got a functional versus a dysfunctional, and sometimes they're on a timeline as well because you're seeing a horse over, the body adapts over time and changes can happen over time. So you can almost start with something that seems quite small, and in the long term, like even over the course of a horse's life, that's, if you're managing something in your own body for 15 years, you're going to end up with structural and functional changes. And so, which we'll talk a bit more about, unraveling things and managing primary issues, but functional versus dysfunctional compensation.
And do
Um,
we talk about the word decompensation?
Not yet, but it's an interesting one. So it's sometimes more of an osteopathic term. It talks about when the body is compensating, and eventually that compensation isn't sustainable anymore. So you get a bit of a breakdown of the system or the body, and you would often start to see changes that, we describe as maybe lameness or really dysfunctional movement. And usually that's, it's having an impact on the horse, especially maybe their behavior, the way they feel, their comfort is really being impacted at that stage.
Yeah, and I think also that can happen, say you've got a horse that's moving up through the levels of dressage or jumping, and so they're going fine. They're maybe like competing really successfully at a certain level. And then you ask them to go up in a level where they're being asked to do harder movements, higher jumps, um, whatever the discipline is, but they're increasing their level. So they were fine at the lower level, like they were going along, you know, pulling up fine, competing fine, clear rounds of jumping, good dressage scores, and then all of a sudden at this new level, they're not able to do that anymore. Like it's just pushed them out of that pattern of compensation. And
That's manageable at a level, and then it's not
yeah,
sustainable.
and then now they're just all of a sudden knocking a rail, or um, feel like they're having to go faster to clear the jumps, or they're struggling with, that can a half pass, or and exercises that you weren't asking them to do before. So they were fine. They were able to maintain that. And I think that sometimes we have to recognize that is the limit of that horse's potential because of their underlying compensatory slash functional patterns. Or, you might have to do something else to get them to be able to go to that level. Like it's like what the trainers say often, when you get to a certain level, you have to go back to the basics and correct the foundation. So
Yeah,
you can get away, especially horses, they're amazing athletes. They can get away with doing high level stuff and not be functional at that. They can clear the jumps and not be doing it in a sustainable, functional way. But at some point, the wheels are going to fall off, and hopefully that doesn't end in somebody dying, but it can. Like I've watched horses jumping and thinking like, oh, that horse always leaves that right leg, that right front leg down at some point. It's going to catch it, and that could mean significant, damage for the horse or the rider. So if we can understand as much as possible about what's going on in the individual horse's body, we can, work to avoid catastrophic injuries happening.
absolutely. Yeah. So if that's, sort of the concept, the wider concept of, compensation, the basic being that primary injury or an issue has created a pattern of movement in the body, and that is compensation itself. So whether it is transient or long-term or anything, something has created a change in the way that they're moving. And over the long term, that movement pattern becomes normalized for the horse.
Yeah, due to pain or restriction. And then they can like protect an area of that pain or dysfunction. So it can become quite specific to the individual area.
Biceps or
Like,
the lateral tricep.
yep, keep going. You just dropped out. Just
Oh,
not where I
talking.
was, where I was up to.
I was just talking about the fact that, protecting an area or a dysfunction. You mentioned you can have something very local, like the elbow and the triceps, just locking it down and keeping it healthy. And that overall the horse is being protective of that pathology or the lack of balance or stability. And that where it comes in, we talked about the primary versus the secondary. They're either protecting something very specifically or the whole body is involved. And we're going to talk about that, what it means to see something and take it at face value, as opposed to understanding that it's representative possibly of something bigger through the whole horse.
Yeah, and a horse that especially is neurologically unstable, they have a whole body compensation pattern going on there.
Yeah.
And that's, really important to recognize because those horses will often be quite spooky, quite reactive, unpredictable, and really they're just trying to compensate
Yeah.
for their inability to maintain their own balance and stability. So it's important to kind of recognize, yeah, do you have a local compensation or do you have a broad whole body kind of compensation happening?
Yeah. And I think, I know this comes up a lot in the podcast, but that point in itself, the fact that horses, when we ask horses to work with us and move and do things, when you come back to the fact that when I ask my horse to do something, do they do it? Or will they do it? Or do I have to ask them very hard, or will they just flat out refuse? Often, horses labeled lazy or that don't want to do it, there is there is every chance that your horse needs to prioritize something else, like a compensatory pattern, to keep their balance and to keep their comfort.
Yeah, or they just
Further.
can't functionally do it,
Yeah,
like there's a tension pattern that's happening that means that they can't do that movement. And I think a good way to check for that is if the horse can give it to you in one direction, or then and they can't give it to you in the other direction, they understand what you're asking them. They understand the cues, that telling me I understand, but I just can't give it to you on the other side for whatever reason. Maybe it's your you problem. it's the way you're asking, you're different. Maybe it's a them problem, maybe it's a compensation pattern. But it's generally not that the horse is being difficult. And I mean, we've talked about that a lot. um, but like if we talk about compensation patterns, what are some of the things that we can see with that?
So, like you said, a compensation pattern being a habitual pattern, it's a habit, and the body's adopted. It can or may not be associated with pain because habitual movements don't need to be painful. It's actually just a learned way of going.
They
And
think that is normal. Like their brain
yeah,
is like, this is normal. Like, when you go to the chiro or the osteo and they're like, oh, your shoulder, like you're walking really crooked, and you're like, or probably a better example is you're riding and your instructor tells you like you're really dropped in that shoulder or that rib cage, and you're like, no, but and then they tell you to straighten up and you're like, oh, that does not feel, that feels like I'm totally crooked now, right? But you're actually totally straight. But your nervous system has developed a new normal that is crooked or compensating, but it recognizes that this is normal for you now. So
that's
sorry
funny
to cut
because
you off with that.
I'm looking at myself as I have my low shoulder is sitting low. I was like, but when I pick it up, like I feel it in my lower left back.
Your body has
Yeah,
learned how to deal with that.
that's
Yeah.
not my neutral. Yeah. So, and of course you can also have structural restrictions. So it doesn't have to be painful, but um, it's kind of like I don't know if anybody's ever seen bodybuilders, but their range of motion really changes even when it's not painful because the volume of muscle and the tension that it holds as a baseline doesn't allow them into certain directions. And so there can be lots of different tissue in the body that's a structural restriction. And of course, you can have an isolated pattern, like we were talking about the triceps, as opposed to a whole body compensation pattern, because everything is connected and influencing one another. So I know you were saying earlier, you can influence a diagonal forelimb from a right hind, and a lot of that is explored actually in, the idea of the myofascial connections as well throughout the body and loading so that you can unload something else or that your body will lock down to add more stability to a certain area as well. So one example could be high heel, low heel syndrome, often seen in the front feet, where like one horse has a front foot that where the heel is upright and basically puts that foot and then leg a little bit higher than the other side, and the other one often has like a pretty flat foot and the toe is running forward, and you can see the difference at the shoulders. And so to associate to compensate on the topic, to compensate for the change in the alignment of the leg and the placement of essentially the bones and the structure of the body in relation to one another, you then have a change in the muscling pattern, and then the fascia is going to be influenced. So that's quite a common one that I think pops up for a lot of horses.
And
What
that can
about
be from birth or developed from an injury. Like I've seen a
yeah.
high heel or a club foot develop from an injury in that leg,
Hmm.
or even just a change in loading, so they're offloading a leg from an abscess.
Yeah,
We had chronic abscessing for a period of time, and their hoof structure changes, and then that changes the compensation patterns of the whole body, as
absolutely.
opposed to a foal that developed it from a young age due to other issues such as rib trauma and birth trauma.
Yeah. And so it becomes a bit of a puzzle, recognizing pieces of the puzzle, and understanding the complexity to rebuild it into a simpler puzzle. So, maybe deconstruct like over a long time, releasing and changing the horse and supporting their primary issues, and then possibly even supporting their secondary issues that have come along because of this compensation. Can you think of any other old, injuries or things that pop up?
Yeah, I mean, I've treated a number of horses that have had like fractured pelvises as a young horse, which changes the structure of their pelvis. So it's now not the same on each side, and it will never ever be the same on each side now. The bone structure has changed, and so therefore the horse has to constantly compensate for that. Like you try to get them in the best state of function that they have available to them and help support that area, but they're never going to move in, a completely balanced way. Like it's changed the way now that the forces travel through the body from that. The other thing that, you can influence, but sometimes is permanent, is a scar. So if a scar has become scar tissue and you're never going to change it back to the normal tissue of that area, such as a muscle, and you've got a big clump of scar tissue, you can improve the functionality of that scar, the comfort of it, the elasticity to a degree, but the scar's always there. And so it's still going to have an influence on how the rest of the body moves. And, I've certainly seen that, especially with hamstring scars, and head shakers, and lots of other scars, where we manage the scar, the owner manages the scar, but if we stop managing the scar, the compensation patterns come back. And so that's an area that then falls on the owner to be aware of, to manage it, to know when it's not in its optimal state of health, because even though it's scar tissue, you can still optimize the health of that area. And yeah, and that's why the more you can understand your horse from a horse owner perspective, like the more you know about its little things that it's dealing with, like joints, scars, whatever, weaknesses and imbalances, then the more you can understand how to help them. Yeah, what are some other things?
So, I mean, some things that you might see, compensation is seen in many horses, but tension in the back. So often a tension through the back can be a lack of ability to utilize the core. So that can be a primary issue. If you're talking about maybe colic surgery and that scar tissue that's inhibiting the abdominals from working through that space, and then
Using the spine.
yeah, using the spine. So your tension in the back, rather than it being a space that can open and lengthen and have good quality strength, it just kind of becomes a lockdown unit, and you would see it as tension in the spine, and in the back when maybe you go to put the saddle on, the horse is like, oh, my back's, sore, and or it's tight, or your body worker comments this is tight, or you notice, that your horse's back is getting tight. There can also be a secondary inability to use the core. So a primary one being, for some reason there's an issue with the abdominals, or for some reason the horse doesn't want to use its core, such as a stifle issue. So you're seeing back tension that could be related to issues, and that's why you want to do investigations and kind of unwind things and figure out where is the primary issue.
Yeah, and sometimes that primary issue at the time is not obvious, so the stifles look fine because the back is kind of splinting to enable that motion. Like I had it years ago where a horse passed a vet check, a pre-purchase exam, and when I saw the horse, I thought, oh, gee, it moves weird behind, and I didn't like the way it did small circles, but it wasn't lame. It wasn't obviously lame on a straight line. And so I could understand how it passed the pre-purchase. Um, and I said to my client, like, I don't know, it's something, there's a few red flags here, I'm just not sure. And anyway, after I think it was 3 sessions, the horse was lame, like obviously lame. So I was like, great, now here's the primary. And so we sent it off to the specialist and x-rayed the stifles, and both stifles had old fractures of the femur in them. So yeah, like it was compensating, but A, because it was bilateral, so that can help really hide issues because they're compensating the same on either side. And B, I don't think she'd been in work either from memory. I can't remember 100%. if she was in work at that point. But yeah, she'd been compensating super well. So um, taking away that compensation for her meant we could get a diagnosis because she'd been through the vet the first time and cleared, right? And so that I've had that happen, but then you take away the compensation, we get a primary diagnosis. And B, it means that she didn't really end up having a ridden career with my owner, so she was like, okay, well, I love her for who she is and her temperament. She's kept her for the rest of her life. But um, yeah, and they did surgery and unfortunately didn't create soundness in her case because it was a chronic issue. But yeah, that's an example where compensation can hide the primary pathology. And so we do need to be aware of that when we're looking at a horse that as a body worker, that's a big responsibility, like, and I kind of use it as a warning these days when I see a horse and I'm like, oh, there's a lot of tension in this horse. I say to the owner, I don't know exactly what's underneath. These are my suspicions. I'm concerned about these areas, but I could unravel an underlying lameness here. Um, and so if the horse is in work, that's not something that we would want to do at that time. But the owner has to kind of be willing to realize that you didn't make the horse worse. It's actually the horse's underlying problems that made the horse worse. So it can be a really difficult line for a body worker to travel, especially if you're inexperienced, because that horse comes up lame, you don't get to see it again, they blame you. Where when it was actually already there was already a problem. It's just that you've released the compensation. And I guess that comes back to, well, why do we want to release compensation? Do you want to go through some of that?
Yeah. Now that we've made it sound scary.
Yeah.
To get to the bottom of a problem, or as close to the bottom as you can get. So trying to understand what the real issue is, like what you've just said, getting to find out, it's in the stifles. Now we've done more investigations and figured out that this isn't an issue maybe that we can fix, but also just getting there so that you can support whatever the primary issue is and identify that primary so that you can create new patterns of motion, and so that you have an opportunity to find and create improvement. So that can be through developing a realistic plan for the horse, whether that's workload, discipline, owner management, um, just finding out what you're going to do and what your perhaps altered expectations could be, or um, yeah, like just it's for the long term, for the benefit of the horse, for understanding what's going on and seeing how much better you can improve their life and improve the satisfaction of everybody.
Yeah, and sometimes, it doesn't work out how we want it to in terms of like we had a plan for a horse to achieve a specific level of discipline, and sometimes we uncover things where we're like, this horse is probably not really going to hold up to that. Like I did have a horse a little while ago who, he'd been traveling along fine, but as we unraveled him and I said to the owner, I kind of said, this area doesn't want to release and this area is really tight. And, there was some hyoid weird stuff going on. And, he used to just sit in a frame and he went quite well. He did very well in competing because he just sat there. But then as we released it, body patterns changed. And then he had gelding scar release and different things. And then his primary hock problem came out and there was chronic lameness relating to that. So, you know, it's a hard one because he was not a happy horse before. Like he was very cranky all the time, and that was kind of a bit of his label was the cranky horse.
Yeah.
But from a competition perspective, he was doing well. But, within himself, he became a happier horse. But then we brought out this underlying problem that he may have had from the beginning, and that's why all the other things started to build over years. So yeah, it can be difficult when there was an apparent lameness, but we have to recognize the other signs that horses are telling us about how that compensation is affecting him. So
Yeah.
yeah, I guess that brings us to the question of like, well, when do we want to release compensation? Because you don't just want to go out there and go, oh look, I can see all this compensation. Like, I can see this horse is so tight here and so tight there. Like, we're just gonna like make him all soft and supple. You
Yeah.
know, you don't just want to go there and do that because you want to set everyone up for success and you want to make sure that the horse has time to recover, time to reset, and you want to make sure that, the owner is willing to put in that time and develop skills to help the horse. And, there's been times where I've said, and it depends how you treat, okay? There's a lot of different treatment tools, some of which go deeper into the body, and some that are more superficial, and the horse just puts back on the compensation that it needs and it can keep functioning. So when when I'm first seeing a horse, if they've got competitions kind of coming up and I've started seeing them in the middle of a competition season, I'll just err on the side of caution, and try to create mobility and function. But if something says I don't want to let go, then I don't push that to let go and try to just set up the horse to like protect itself. But if the owner says to me, I'm willing to support this horse in any way that it needs, I'm willing to not ride for a period of time, like whatever we need to do to optimize the horse's health, then my treatment changes and the outcome changes and the horse, and I say to the owner at that point, well, we're just gonna have to see how this unravels
Yeah.
and see what we get back to. And also the timeline is going to be longer because we can maintain a horse that's compensating, continuing to do their work, but with the other, where the horse where you're like, okay, let's see what function we have here. I think we talked about it earlier before we came on, but they can get a lot worse before they get better because you're showing up the underlying problems, and so they can either become more unstable. There might be different pain happening in different areas. The condition that is underlying can become more obvious. It might actually get worse. But then that's like letting go of the old patterns. And then you have to develop a plan with the owner to establish the new patterns, which is going to take time to build up to get strong enough to support the underlying pathologies or underlying challenges with that. And it does require a lot of time and effort from the owner. However, it doesn't always. It depends on their expectation, because just one example is, I think I've talked about him before, but like a horse that I've treated where when I first put my hands on him, his whole body was like, I may as well have put my hands on the table. He couldn't stand still because he couldn't stabilize. He had no balance and he struggled to lift up his legs for the trimmer. He also has quite a lot of ongoing anxiety issues, which the owner had done a great job at getting him to a place where he had more emotional regulation. But over time, and I'm trying to think, did he actually get worse? I don't remember him getting worse, but that's probably because the owner really stayed within his ability. So he wasn't being ridden and he was doing just very gentle exercises. And like, I mean, just you would be surprised at how little we were doing, like tiny little exercises within his capability. And I think that is the key, right? So we stayed within what function he had available to him at the time, and we never asked him to go beyond that function. So as his spinal motion increased, we worked within that spinal motion. So with some movement exercise, some carrot mobilizations, she would struggle to work with him in specific exercise, like turn him a specific direction, And so, I could have said to her, oh, well, you need to work on that more. But what we knew with him is that if we pushed him, he would explode and rear. And so we worked within that. And like, it's amazing with the smallest, like she's not doing much. Like she takes him for walks, she does 5 or 10 minutes, and his spinal motion, like last time I treated him, I was able to adjust him, which there was no way I was even thinking about adjusting him for the first 4 sessions because I would have just caused him a lot of pain to make spinal areas move that were so, so restricted. But like I was able to motion him comfortably. He stood there comfortably. Um, we were able to get him to turn in the opposite direction. Like he's still a little worried about it, but he did it and he's happy for us to be on either side and he can stop imbalance, he can start imbalance, he can change within the gait. Now it's simple things. If we asked him to be ridden in this time, if we asked him to be trotting in this time, if we asked him to be lunging in this time, even if we asked him to work on soft surfaces in this time, we would have decompensated him 100%. Like, so we would have ended up with a horse who was pretty grumpy, pretty sore, and probably got worse. And so it's hard for people to do less because often when you're repatterning a compensatory pattern, you actually need to do a lot less. And it generally requires a period of time off the horse or very mindful riding. And if the saddle is not right and the rider is not right and you do too much, you undo that reprogramming and you actually set it back a long way. And I really think that's the hardest thing for us to do, me included, as humans, is to actually do less when we want to reprogram the horse's movement patterns, nervous system, emotional regulation.
Yeah. And it really is the crux of change.
Yeah, and it's the
Yeah.
hardest to do.
True, deep, meaningful change.
Yeah.
That's yeah, assistant. And I know we've spoken about this too. Of course there's so much value in the body work, but bodies move, so they need maintenance, and the way that they move maintains them. So the value coming from taking that time can be exponential in where it gets you in the long term.
It's crazy how quickly horses can improve when we don't do too much. Like, yeah, it probably some of the biggest changes that I've had between bodywork sessions is when the owner's just been doing like really simple things, but allowing the horse to stay in emotional regulation and like promoting nervous system balance and awareness, and working within that horse's window of tolerance. Like Emma talks about, in osteopathy and craniosacral and stuff, they talk about the window of tolerance. But, I think within this, it's like if you observe the horse's body, you can see the physical window of tolerance within their body, like looking for the muscles that are bracing, and then trying to stay under that sort of brace, or their like posture that they take in certain movements, if there's tension in that posture. And so, there's a lot of ways that we can stay in that window of tolerance, and we're gradually like stretching it and stretching it. And sometimes you have to do things to see, can we go up to the next level now? Yep, okay, everything's good. We've jumped to the next level and we're still on an incline, or we jump to the next level. Oh, the little wheels fell off a bit. We'll just backpedal a little bit. So
Yeah,
yeah, it is really important to do less.
definitely. And then
Do
bringing
something.
in do something, but do less.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
Don't do
Yep.
nothing because that's not beneficial either.
Yeah. And then, bringing in your, say, muscle activations. So we've talked, one example was about the core. So getting the core to activate to help your back function and, of course, the whole horse. The reason that you're getting an area to activate is so that it can play the role that it needs to, for the horse's best biomechanics to come to the front and be available. And so if you've got very important areas of a horse that aren't functioning, say their quadriceps, then you're going to see compensation in other areas because they're not playing the role that they should be. And so activations become very important because we're saying, hey, I need you to come online and play your part in this system so that our movement can improve. And so activations are super important, a big part of that rehab process. And then other areas don't have to work so hard to carry the job of themselves, and some other part of the body that needed rest maybe at the time, but now is ready to come online.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I was just thinking of a couple of stories too about compensation and how, you know, sometimes we have to be not scared about it falling apart. So I had one horse that I treated, Frankie, I've talked about him a bit on my Facebook page. And I said to the owner, because everywhere was tight and every leg was difficult to pick up, and he was just like a braced, reactive. Anyway, but initially I think he was so braced that he couldn't really react, and he was kind of in this braced, shut down place. And I think after a couple of treatments, she was like, "Oh, Frankie's like really spooky and really reactive," and I was like, well, that's actually where his nervous system is at. It was just really what it was hidden by his shutdown. And then over time, like we've managed that, and his ability to, like, he's become a better horse than he ever was, you know? And he couldn't canter, he'd just bolt in the canter before. The last time that she rode him, one of the last times that she rode him, she's got other stuff going on, but um, he did the best canter ever. Now that's been a progress, and we're able to treat him because we want to be in the shade. We're able to treat him next to the road now, and he doesn't freak out. Um, like if a bird tweeted, he'd just like freak out because his nervous system was not used to processing his environment. It was like in shutdown. And, so I think it's also letting go of the fear. When a horse gets worse, we all freak out, right? We go, oh my God, the horse is worse. What have we done? We've unraveled it. Like, shit. Instead of going, great, the horse got worse. We're now back to
Yeah.
a primary. This is actually a bit more the horse that we have. It's not pleasant. It maybe and sometimes is dangerous even, but this is the horse. Like this is the horse that we have. So, and sometimes, we can control that. And I've said to people, like there was a recent person at a clinic and the horse had retired from its discipline and it had successfully gone through its discipline. And she said to me, this horse is the soundest horse that we've ever had in this high level discipline. And the one thing I said to her was, okay, if we change this postural pattern in this horse right now, we could unravel a lot of stuff because this horse has been compensating really well, to the point that you're telling me that she has been sound throughout her career. And the soundest horse that you've had out of this person's probably trained hundreds of horses.
Mhm.
And I said, like, yeah, if we start to change this horse's postural patterns, then you could end up seeing lots of things underlying that she's been able to compensate for. And yeah, so, she said, well, she's retired now, so let's see. And then I haven't seen the horse because it's in another state, but yeah, they said that, yeah, it's bringing out a lot of her underlying issues now because she'd learned how to set herself in a way that allowed her to do her job well. So that is a horse that I would not have wanted to change that postural pattern. If a owner came to me and said, my horse is competing successfully at the moment, I would try to work with any weak areas that I see to like help improve them. But then you've got to be real careful about changing the whole posture if they've been able to compensate in that, especially horses that are quite set in their neck. Like they're often set in their neck because they're using that to keep everything set. So just being aware, if you take away a set neck, there's probably a reason that it's set. um, in there. So yeah, so she's in that process at the moment of like decompensation, and then they're going to have to figure out the ways to help her to develop new movement pathways, new movement patterns, and get a comfortable, efficient movement again.
Which really comes back to the foundation of management in the long term, understanding your management to support the primary for comfort and function.
Yeah, and removing like, as young as the horse can be, like dealing with any compensatory patterns as early as possible. So that means in terms of age,
Yeah.
so recognizing a foal that's showing compensatory patterns, like the way they're holding their head and neck, the way they're holding their back, um, grazing postures, like dealing with them early on as a foal. And then also if your horse has an injury, like rehabbing them from day one, developing a rehab plan from day one so they don't set up compensation patterns. And that can be simple exercises, but the sooner that we start a rehab plan, the less compensation we're going to get. And then making sure that your rehab plan is complete. So whenever I've gone in on a rehab plan, I'm like, I want to get this horse, especially an older horse, I'm like, I want to get this horse better than it was before the injury, so that we can then, especially if the injury happened like in work, then there's a reason that that injury happened. And so then you want to, get them back to a better place to avoid. I think there's a lot of injuries that occur due to compensatory patterns, especially things like suspensory. I think that's purely a compensatory injury. And if you've got proximal suspensory issues in the fore or the hind limb, you have to look at what's happening with the upper body. So we also need to recognize injuries that are due to compensation and then try to avoid them from happening.
Definitely. And of course, preventing, in the direction of talking about horses who have sustained injuries riding, being able to prevent that is always going to be the best way of going. So developing core strength pre-riding. So that's, I think in an ideal world, we would have a system that was across the board for horses where you developed your horse's core strength and you had them going on the ground, probably able to trot and canter with good core strength before we rode them.
Yeah, and you know what would support that? Having competitions where we could take our horses on the ground and do like dressage tests in hand and working equitation in hand and um, cross country type courses in hand, like something,
Yeah.
where that was actually supported to do in hand training as a prerequisite to riding. Like the baby levels are in hand. How cool would that be?
Yeah. Yeah. It'd
Put
be
it out
very
there.
supportive for the industry. Yeah. If somebody feels like setting those up and then everybody supports it, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, one day.
And
One day.
exactly. Yeah. So yeah, of course, and using your breaks, in your long-term management, breaks are very important when you're trying to change compensation because fatigue is a really big part of that journey. When you're butting up on the edge of fatigue, your horse is going to fall back into the compensation pattern that is easiest for them in a frame. So if your horse has a level of strength and endurance in a certain compensatory pattern, and then you get them moving well, but then you do too much of it and you fatigue, it's kind of like if I hold myself in my perfect my perfect sitting posture for ages, eventually my muscles that I haven't conditioned well enough are going to be like, we want to slouch. And you go back into that, it's the same. You butt up against fatigue, doing work, and your horse is going to go back to their compensatory pattern. So using that range where you're able to build, and you said decrease your workload so that all the work that you're doing is quality over quantity, you're going to get much better outcomes.
Yeah, I
Um,
think
about that.
That's really important. I mean, it's even like us, like you talked about the postural thing and sitting up. Like for some people, you can maintain that for a few seconds before your body starts to drop again. But
Yeah.
then over time, like I look at my sister, right? She was a ballet dancer and a Pilates instructor for a long time. She still now has amazing posture because she trained it for years and years and years. And, whereas me, I thought ballet was boring and I didn't train my posture that well. And maybe there was other reasons that I found it harder to hold that posture. Like I had a fair few injuries when I was younger and stuff. So, but I don't have that natural posture now because I never conditioned those pathways to the point that they became a normal part of my system. So that's what we want for horses. And the thing that surprises me the most when working with horses and reprogramming that is how quickly they get fatigued. Like sometimes it's a quarter of a circle. Like they do this, sometimes it's 2 steps. I'm like, "Oh, that was the 2 steps." Like, and then you
Yay.
give 'em a break, the nervous system recognizes it. They often go like, whoa, you see their eyes change and their system like goes, oh my God, that felt different. And then, over time that gets bigger, 3 steps or half a circle. But if we get the quarter of a circle and then we keep asking for the rest of the circle, by the time we stop, the nervous system didn't recognize that was the good bit. And so it's really important that if you see the good bit, to stop, and whether that means stop and let go of your reins and let them have a walk, or it means stop and actually stop, or it means even just take the pressure off and say, yeah, like that was really good. You have to have a way that the horses consciously recognizes that, ah, that's the movement. And
Yeah.
what also amazes me is that I will think that was the step, and the horse's whole expression changes. Like they're like, oh my God, that felt so different. So yeah, we have to um think about how we can really help the horse with that. And monitoring the horse's back and their head and neck positions is also a really good way, because if they're able to hold themselves in a pretty nice neutral head and neck position, they're probably doing okay. But if you notice that they hold it for a little bit and then they have to drop it to the ground, or they hold it for a little bit and then they have to lift it up, or they're just inconsistent in that head carriage, that there is your sign that they're not um, able to maintain what you're asking them to do. And I remember riding Jelly at the start. I think I've talked about this, and I let go of his reins and his head was just like it looked so bad. But that's where he was at. Like that's where his body obviously felt the most ease, the most efficient, and it was a real state of dysfunction, right? But
Yeah.
he had to recognize that this is actually not a functional place, to then
Yeah.
show him here, here, here. And it's taken years for him to establish those patterns, because he had 13, 14 years of establishing the other patterns. And we also have to remember that when we're establishing new patterns, how many years have these patterns been in the system for? Because
Yeah.
we can't expect them to change overnight if the horse has been traveling in that pattern for 10 years or 15 years. It's
Yeah.
going to take time. There's going to be decompensation. So, um, yeah, we need to recognize that when the horse is doing more than they're physically able to do, we need to kind of start to recognize the brace and compensation. We also need to recognize if an area is protecting an unstable joint, because they may need that until you improve that joint stability, such as underlying elbow dysfunction, often the lateral tricep, or pelvic dysfunction, often the glutes.
The
Um,
hip.
yeah, like the biceps with the hip, um, or the hamstrings as well. So we need to recognize when that joint does need it for stability, but then we also need to help them create more ideal stability for that joint.
Yeah.
We want to also, just be aware of how deep we go in bodywork sessions, in terms of where the horse is at in that moment, and be careful with our therapeutic and targeted work as a body worker, you know, if we're starting to treat a horse in full work, or, just seeing a horse for a first time, just being aware that it's not always obvious what the underlying pathologies are.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, what would your kind of takeaways be?
Just sometimes knowing that there are benefits to understanding and letting the compensation go, obviously in the right time, like you've said. Um, and I'd also just like to say that sometimes it does mean that there are some uncomfortable conversations and uncomfortable, I suppose, realities, but that as well for new body workers or owners, like it's okay to have the conversation. Like, I'm not 100% sure about this, and I can see this going on, and I want to say this out loud to the owner who's in front of me, and I don't know, like this feels a bit tight, and I'm gonna maybe massage through it. And I need you to be looking at the horse as well. It's not completely up to the body worker. The whole body is not your responsibility because it is what it is, and the owner also um has a massive role to play in the whole system, and you don't know what's going to happen. Like, you don't know for sure if you give the horse a good massage, if they're not going to sort of be jelly the next day and then be a bit stiff in the days afterwards. Like, there's a
I've been um I've been told before by an osteo friend of mine, she's like, you have to let go of the expectation of, you know, the horse getting better from a treatment, and that's really hard to do because that's why we're body workers, right? We're like, we want to help the horse, we want to fix them in inverted commas, and it's really hard to allow the process sometimes of what it needs to be. And it's hard as a body worker not to blame yourself when the wheels fall off, because there's a lot of journeys involved with that. Like, it's not just your journey, there's the horse and the person as well learning. We're all learning, but yeah, it can be really hard to let go of that expectation of what should come out of your session, and allow the horse the healing journey that it needs to, you know, in the moment. And yeah, sometimes with experience, you can recognize the patterns and go, okay, this horse is probably going to be sore tomorrow. And sometimes you can't, because there's a complexity of patterns going on there. But I do think, just like you said, it's important to have the discussion with the owner, specifically, and for owners to be maybe a little more realistic in our expectations of horses.
Yeah, definitely. And also just knowing that obviously different people have different expectations, but you I don't believe that you really get in, get out, deal with issues in one session ever. Like, it really
Right.
is a concerted long-term um thing, and sometimes yeah, the client that's in front of you isn't going to play into that, and it's not all about you.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing, to just my final thing, would be horses are amazing athletes, and they really are great, probably the world's greatest compensators, because they are a prey animal. It's a survival instinct at the end of the day. And just because a horse, yeah, appears to be coping doesn't always mean that they are. And especially a horse that does enjoy well, there's two prongs to this. Like, a horse that does enjoy what they do will often, especially a strong mare, will often overcome a lot of physical barriers to continue to do what they're asked to do. I mean, gosh, Patch was a great example of that, the pony that I had. Like, she did every discipline and was great at it, never really complained. But when I took away her compensation, I saw all the things that she had dealt with within her own body and never complained, you know, because she was just a good little mare who was like, this is my job, this is what I have to do. And so we have to recognize that horses are really good at that, and some horses will give everything they can, and it doesn't always mean that it's okay. And so the more that we can kind of help them and recognize them, and then others are just fine with it, you know, like they're okay with dealing whatever they've got. And sometimes we've got to be careful not to say that the pathology is the horse, because I've also seen horses where they have a lot of pathology and they're like, I'm fine. Like I'm okay with it. And that's where like we're going to have another discussion about, you know, pain and dysfunction, because yeah, I've seen them where I'm like, gosh, this horse shouldn't be doing this, but like they seem okay with it. So
Yeah.
I'll just keep helping them do it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Wonderful.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining myself, Dr. Raquel Butler and Sophie Vanderberg, in today's podcast. Enjoy your horse time. Please subscribe to the Equine Functional Posture podcast and tell your friends so you don't miss our weekly episodes, and give us a 5-star rating so we can share more valuable insights.
And we'll see you in the next exciting episode.